Hi, everybody. Welcome. Sorry for the slight delay here. My name is Deena Aziz, and I am the Equity Counselor for the region of Quebec. I'm happy to be Zooming today from Tiohtià:ke, or as the settlers call it, Montreal, where the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are recognized as the traditional custodians of these unceded lands and waters. Montreal is home now to a diverse range of Indigenous communities and peoples, and also includes many immigrants and settlers from around the world, including those brought here by force. Given that we are talking a lot about gear and tech and technology, I feel it's also important to acknowledge that the technology we are using is not readily available to many Indigenous peoples and communities, and that technology has a significant ecological impact, which is disproportionately felt by Indigenous communities. Today, we are having a second session on self-tape success or self-tape redux. Many members attended the session we held on December 21st, and it was so wildly met with interest that we decided to have a second one. There were so many questions left lingering at the end that we thought we would have another go and bring back our excellent facilitator, moderator, and self-tape expert, Alex Gravenstein. Thank you so much for coming again. The pandemic has had a huge impact on how we audition for work in live performance. And even as we are starting to, I don't know if I should be crossing what, come out of some of that harder isolation, those changes are likely going to stay with us for a long time, and our members are trying to figure out how to get comfortable, confident, and excel at auditioning digitally. Just before we launch in and I hand things off to Alex, I thought I would see how many people were attending on December 21st, just so we can figure out what level we should be working at. Thank you so much. Okay. I'll give it another 10 seconds. Right. It looks like we have 3/4 new folks, so we will try and calibrate the content to the broadest base. How do I make that go away? Did that go away? I'm really happy to turn things over now to Alex. Just a little housekeeping. If you have questions that come along, we did receive questions in advance, and we're going to try and get to those. If you have questions that come up related to a subject, please put them in the Q&A function, and we will try and keep track of those and plop them in as they are relevant. However, also feel free to use the chat for sharing your best practices and ideas, resources that you've come across. Definitely at the last session, there were lots of great ideas and people sharing their experience and their gear tips and tech tips. And now, if I may, I'd like to hand things over to Alex to get us started.
Hi again, everyone, and hi, new people, and thank you, Equity, for letting me share with you this the crazy time we're living in and finding ways to do our storytelling in a digital medium. So thank you so much for that. It seems that we have a lot of people who weren't here last time. This portion will be focused much more on the nitty-gritty of technology, computers, editing, hardware, things like that. I am going to be going much more into detail on specifically editing and sending files first, and I'm going to try and cover that a little bit more quickly, and then hopefully we'll have the rest of this workshop open to cover any other questions that you might have. But this is being recorded, and if I'm wrong, correct me. It will be shared with you later. So if you didn't hear something the first time, you'll be able to play it back at least and be able to cover it there. I was wondering, Randy, if we might first be able to do those 2 polls to see where we're standing. Excellent, thank you. So this is just a first question to see, how do you tackle your self-tapes right now? Do you have a dedicated camera, or are you using a phone that's an iPhone or an Android phone, which is like the Samsung, the Pixel? And then how do you usually edit your videos? And computer is going to cover anything from if you're on Mac or Windows, and if you're using something like DaVinci Resolve, iMovie, Premiere Pro, and a handful of others. Okay, I think that's actually pretty good representation there. So it looks like we have the majority, at least the majority, are on iPhones and editing on the computer. Great, okay, thank you. So editing on the computer is the ideal option. It gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you're playing with the sound, the image, as well as how you're going to be doing your exports in the end. So I'm going to first of all, share the list of tech stuff we're going to be going through today. I think I have to scoot over for this. There it is. We're going to be going through, like I said, the equipment, setup, video settings for your phone, how you're going to be editing this, playing with including the audio in the end, and exporting, and then whatever anyone else wants to cover. So like I said, this will be much more tech focused. And if at any point we have questions and want to develop more into something, please feel free to use the Q&A. So first off, let's play around with settings. The very best way to get a good quality capture is by making sure your device is set to the proper settings. And there are some tricks that we can do to make that easier for our recording software in the end. So here I'm on the iPhone now, and I want to make sure that everyone knows how to change your actual settings on here. And for that, we open the iPhone, go into settings, go over to camera, and in our very first option up here, we have formats. And we have 2 in here. This is also true for some Android devices. High efficiency is also known as HEVC, high efficiency video codec. And while it might get a good image and be good for storage space, it is really hard for computers to edit on that unless you have a higher end machine. So we do not want to have it on high efficiency. We want to choose most compatible if you're on an iPhone. And for Android devices, just make sure you tick off HEVC or high efficiency. It's labeled differently depending on which phone you're on, but you might have that setting, you might not. There's just too many to cover, so look it up. The next one is, how do we want to record our video? And honestly, you can record at 720 or 1080 is just fine. And make sure that we aim for 30 frames per second. So 720 is shorthand for the resolution 720, for 1280 by 720. And 1080 is shorthand for 1920 by 1080. And those are the 2 HD formats. If you're looking on a small device, they'll pretty much look the exact same in the end. If you're looking on a computer screen or TV, 1080p is going to be the better option of those 2.
Quick question, Alex.
Yeah.
Is the choice between those 2 resolutions going to create a real difference in your ultimate file size? And is it different in terms of the aspect ratio?
So the aspect ratio will be the exact same for both of those, which is 16:9. That's your standard widescreen format that you see on most TVs and most devices. Like if you turn your phone sideways, that's probably a 16:9 aspect ratio. And here you can see the file sizes. Does my mouse show up over top of this?
Yeah.
Great. That is extra easy, extra fingers. So here you can see that 60 megabytes, for 1 minute video will be 60 megabytes at 720, and it'll be more than twice that size at 1080. So if you are always running out of space on your phone, choosing a lower resolution is going to be a good option to make sure that you get the takes that you want and it's not going to cut in the middle of it.
And is it a real difference in terms of the quality of the image?
The quality of the image is almost the same. And since we're all in Canada, many of us will be using something called Casting Workbook, where our videos are going to be uploaded. And Casting Workbook will automatically transcode that video file into a lower resolution regardless. And many other websites do that too. So 720 is usually perfectly fine. And I really wouldn't say it'd be a game changer when it comes to submitting an audition. When I'm on my phone, I record on 720.
David's in the chat is mentioning that most audition calls actually specify to shoot on 720.
And that's probably because of the space. Yeah, thank you. Cool, so that's pretty much it. This is just something I like to say anyway. Oh, no, I have a mouse. I like turning on the grid. This is something that can be optional. The grid is in video mode. That's the top of my head there. We can see that we have a grid that's showing up on this. And that can help with alignment and also making sure things are nice and straight. So I recommend turning that on for your phone as well. Yeah, I think that's going to be it that I'm going to cover for the phone settings. Yay, we get to tick this off. Okay, next I'm going to be going into when you're shooting, make sure that you have enough space on your phone. Trust me, this actually happens a lot where people run out mid-audition. I'm also an audition coach and I work with people online, and at least 1 out of 5 times we have to stop a session midway through just to let someone delete space from their phone. So make sure you take care of that storage space on your phone. Similarly, make sure you have a battery, enough battery, and if not, some sort of power plugged in. These are just the basics, wanted to cover it anyway, because we're doing the tech nitty gritty. Woo! Great, okay. I'm going to, first of all, hide the checklist because I keep moving over. There we go. I'm going to go into the editing now. So we've already covered the settings that we want to do on the phone. There's an app called the VN. That's the letter V and the letter N, and it's free to use. It's on Android. It's on iPhone, and it can give you at least the basic options for trimming your video and exporting it to the settings that casting directors tend to like. So let's jump into that. There we go. So this is the app VN here. When you open it up, what we're going to do is create a brand new project. I'm holding the plus button down there, and I'm going to click New Project. And hey, look, these are our video files. And this is showing an audition I did a couple of years ago, and we're going to use that one. And VN is relatively straightforward to use, which is pretty nice. The first thing I like to do is called reframing, and I'm going to show you how to do this on the phone as well as on the computer before we do some exporting. So reframing or zooming in or repositioning your video is when we want to adjust for the amount of space that we have around us. Film and television tends to like what's called a medium close-up, and that's when we get the bust shot. So we're cutting just around the midsection of the chest to just around the top of the head. This framing that we see here is closer to a close-up already, somewhere between a medium close-up and a close-up. But I'm going to show you how to reframe anyway, just in case we wanted to get something more extreme. So all I did was just tap this, and you see I get the yellow outline. And then I get to use 2 fingers as usual for repositioning and pinching to zoom, and we can get a nice intense reframe over here. I would not recommend doing this reframing for most video auditions. But yeah, that's how we reframe. The video file down here also can be trimmed. So usually we might have the first few seconds of us hitting the record button and backing away, or whatever, or some sort of moment that doesn't add to the story. So all we do is we just tap the video down in the timeline, and then we get these handles, and you can touch that handle and you can click and drag to the moment where you think it is best to start. And that's the same for the end. Go over there, drag it, and voila. Also with VN, they tend to put an extra clip in there to have a title. I usually just delete this. So I can tap that and then go down to delete in this bar at the bottom. So now that I have my video reframed in this very bad reframing here, and I've trimmed it, the next thing I do is I play around with the color. And actually, I haven't done that on VN recently. There we go. So we hit the filter at the bottom. I'll just go back through that again. We hit filter down here at the bottom. We touch adjust, and here we can play around with the settings. Pretty much you want the brights to be comfortably bright. You want the darks to be comfortably dark, and maybe a bit of saturation. Just enough so that we can see some color, some vibrance in the image there. Temperature has to do with how the camera interprets the color white. So sometimes it might look a bit warm, sometimes it might look a bit cold. And since I have a white wall in the background, I can slide this around to try and get that to make it look good, honestly. If your eye says it looks good, it's probably a good bet. So I'm actually happy with where that is. And
Alex,
I hit the check mark. Yes.
I have a very smart sounding question.
Let's do it.
Is it a non-destructive edit in VN? Thank you, Linda, for knowing more than I do.
Linda, that is a great question. And unfortunately, I don't know the answer. Oh, sorry. I was thinking of something else. It is non-destructive. This will not edit the original file, if that's what you mean. If you meant something else, then I can answer that. But this will not alter the original file. So after we've done this, the last thing to do is we give it a listen through. And this part is hard with VN. This is why it's better to work on a computer. Ideally, we want the sound to be as loud as it can be without it clipping. In other words, where the sound level is too high, that it starts cutting it off to make sure that it doesn't damage the speakers. So you can listen through it. The way we adjust volume is we click volume down at the bottom. Oh, sorry, apparently I'm still talking in my video. Oh, it just does it by default. Okay, so we hit volume, it's gonna play through, and we can adjust up and down. Unfortunately, you're just gonna have to do that with trial and error. So that's pretty much it. The last thing we do is exporting. And with that, we hit I'm gonna do it again, the blue button at the top for export. And this is where we get the fun settings. Once again, you'll see some similar things we talked about, 720, 1080. Here I recorded in 720, which I already know I did. So I'm just gonna drag that over to 720. My frames per second, your phone is probably shooting in 30. So if it's already at 30, great, just leave it there. Otherwise, drag it to 30. it's probably a good one to keep it at regardless. Like we said before, we don't want to be shooting at anything above 30, like 50 or 60 frames per second. It's not really necessary and usually increases the file size. So I'm just going to keep it here at 30. And the most important setting we have right over here, this is our bit rate. This is going to come up again when we're sending files from the computer as well. The bit rate is the determining factor for the final file size. How many megabits are we having per second? So the casting usually says they want to have 100 megabyte files, which is a rather confusing metric, because if our file is 100 megabytes, what does that mean if we have a 5-minute audition versus a 30-second audition? It essentially is saying that the larger the audition is, the lower the quality we're going to have, which doesn't quite make sense. So the better way to look at it is how many megabytes should we have per minute? And the answer is roughly 30. And I did all the math for you, so you don't have to. In order to get roughly 30 megabytes per minute, we should have a setting of 4. So this is just a good overall setting. It'll give you good image quality and a good file size. You have flexibility with this though. You can go as low as 1 and it will start looking pretty grainy. And you can probably go up to 8, 9, or maybe even 10 to get that extra bit of detail. If you're sending a resolution of 1080p and it's a smaller file, you can play up there. But honestly, if all of this sounds confusing, I put this on the shared document I'll share with you guys again. Just keep it at 720p, 30 frames per second, and keep this at 4. And you won't have to play with all those other, moving my buttons. You won't have to play with all those other conditionals.
Alex, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to kind of make sure I'm understanding this.
Go for it.
Is it a general rule then that whatever you shot in terms of your resolution and frame rate is what you should be exporting in?
Another good question.
And then the kind of B side to that question is, if you shoot in 1080, is this where you convert to 720?
So I'll answer that second question first. The editing that we do will dictate the final file size, and that's both how many megabytes as well as the actual resolution. I'm getting sweaty apparently. So that is where that is decided. When you shoot it, if you like the idea of reframing and moving your video around, 1080 would be a better way to go, because this way, when you zoom in, you don't lose pixels when you're repositioning it and zooming.
Okay, so it gives you more information to lose.
Exactly, more information to play with. And that's the same thing. If you are comfortable with shooting in 4K and comfortable with editing in 4K, by all means, go for it if it looks good. Just know that you're working with higher video quality and more processing power is required to work with that. So if you are comfortable with that, you can go for it. If not, shoot in 1080 or 720 and you should be good.
And then the bit rate selection is sort of adjustable according to how much material you have. Like the shorter your audition clip, the higher the bit rate you could use in theory?
The higher the bit rate you could use, exactly. Because that'll still keep it under 100 megabytes. I could make a 1-second clip that's exactly 100 megabytes in size. I would probably never need to unless I'm working in actual film production. But you could do that. This setting will give you a good looking quality, and this is the setting I use for the majority of my auditions anyway. You can bring it up to probably about 8, but you will be getting bigger file sizes. The great thing about VN is, once again, it does this math for you. So we can see here the estimated file size for this is 48. So if you're using VN, you actually can slide this around if you want to maximize.
And make a decision right here.
Yeah, you can make a decision right here. But once again, 4 is probably a good bet. Between 3 to 10, somewhere in there. 4 is what I use by default.
Okay. So this is the place to do the conversion from 1080 to 720.
Exactly, as well as the actual encoding. And that's something we'll touch on in more detail when we move over to the computer. But we're going to jump ahead to the export. So obviously,
I just want to jump back to one question, going back to clearing out space in your storage before you start. How much space do you need?
So we saw when we were looking at at least the iPhone settings that it's taking roughly 70 megabytes per minute of footage at 720p. So that should hopefully give you an idea. I'd like to have at least 4 or 5 gigabytes or so free
For an audition.
Honestly, the more wiggle room, the less troubleshooting you have to do, the better. And that's why practicing this, finding what is easiest for you for doing all this annoying editing work, finding what's comfortable for you and getting comfortable with it is going to be a great step, because self-tapes like this are probably going to stay. And getting comfortable with even doing it on the phone in case you're traveling somewhere. This audition that I'm showing you here was actually shot in a hotel when I was on a different shoot. And I brought my camera up with me, but I didn't bring a computer. So I did all the editing on my phone for this. So practicing those worst case scenarios really can help that peace of mind, instead of, stressing about, we'd rather stress about putting our energy into having fun instead of stressing about the details when it comes to how am I going to edit this, how am I going to send it.
And for those folks who are not editing on the phone, shooting on the phone, but transferring to computer to edit, how does that happen?
We are going to cover all that next.
Okay.
Like I said, this is going to be very in-depth and very tech-oriented. So we'll finish off with the phone. Actually, I'm going to go into editing on the computer. I'll just keep this a bit more linear. So there's a couple of programs that are free and across multiple platforms. They're going to be in the file that I have shared. Actually, I'm going to share it again with everyone. It's right over here. So you can use this to follow along. All right, so you can look at that. It's going to cover a lot of what I'm talking about in here, have links to the programs that I'm recommending and some settings and things like that. So I understand this can get overwhelming. This is going to hopefully help out with that. So on to editing. The two programs that I recommend, one of them is called DaVinci Resolve. That's free to use. It's very powerful. The two downsides to it is that it can be hard for computers to run it, and it can be a bit overwhelming to look at, but there are loads of tutorials online with how to use it. If you are comfortable with jumping into something that looks like a bit more of a professional workspace for editing, I highly recommend going to DaVinci Resolve. It's what I use for my professional projects. I'm also a video editor, and it's what I use for my self-tapes too. If you are not comfortable with that, then you can look at a program called Shotcut. That's all one word. It's in the document. I have links as well. There's plenty of tutorials online for that. It works for the vast majority of computers, as well as ones that are struggling a bit with processing. And it gets the job done. It does have a couple of little bugs here and there, but for editing self-tapes, it can do the work for you. Since it doesn't have the full suite of tools of DaVinci, there might be a little bit of extra work you have to put into your edits though.
And are these both free softwares?
They are both absolutely free, and they're available on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So let's jump over to DaVinci Resolve. Sorry, my computer is being temperamental right now. There we go. Thank you, Deena. Okay. So when you open up Resolve, you can go ahead and create a brand new project. I'm not going to show that because it's too many shared screens. The new project will look something like this. And every video editor you use is going to have, excuse me, pretty much the same sort of options available. There's some sort of place where we get to look at our media. You can see down here it says media. There's some sort of place where we get to do our editing, and there's some sort of place where we get to do our delivery. In Resolve, we have this little rocket ship. And with our media, this is where we import what we want to play with. So if you shot on your camera or your phone, hopefully you know how to send it over. If not, I'm sorry, you'll just have to Google it. I don't have enough time to cover that as well in this. For Resolve, we can just drag and drop our file right into it, or you can navigate to it through the system over here. I find dragging and dropping is much easier. Next, all we have to do is we right-click this and say create new timeline using selected clip. And we can call it whatever we want. Here, I'm just going to use the actual, I'm just going to put my name on there. Keep it simple. Create. Now we want to open up this timeline. Double click it, and you see that it has moved us down into the Edit tab where we get to edit it. The wonderful thing about Resolve is this helps out with some of the steps that we need to do for our footage. The first thing I do is normalize my audio. Normalizing means make the audio levels normal with respect to loudness. So with Resolve, we can just right-click it, and you see that we have an option for normalize audio level. And these are the options I suggest. You can look into it as to why I do. I think this is the Netflix standard. And when I click normalize, what you'll see is it'll take my volume and it'll bring it up to a louder level because this is pretty quiet. So I hit normalize. We're gonna wait for it to go through it. And ta-da, you saw that it brought it up. Normalizing it just slides the volume for you. So here it adjusted my audio by 5 decibels. You can look into that more if you'd like to. But like I said, we're just going to be jumping through settings to cover as much as we can in this one video. So I normalize first. Next thing I do is I trim, just like we did before in VN, or you can resize. So I just drag this over. That's where I want to start. Eye contact, why not? Make sure that my video is back to the start. I do the same thing for the end. I can even play through here a bit. And I find that that's the moment that I want. We'll pretend that I have sound on. And I can either grab the end and slide it over, or I can hit the blade tool and I can cut it there. Get my cursor to select again, click this and delete. And now we have our trimmed video. Let's say that I want to resize it. We can do it manually through these tools up here, which I actually use all the time. For repositioning, if you want to click and drag things instead, you can use this. So we click this over here and we get this little tool to click and drag. The downside of this is the tool sort of disappears when you zoom in too much, but they both get the end result. That's pretty much it when it comes to the editing for this. We did the audio, we did the resizing. If you want to play around with the color, you can go into this color tab and it's going to look very, very scary. I'll show you the basics in this just really quickly, but hopefully when you shot it, it looks good enough we don't have to. I'm just literally touching the color wheels over here. If you're very lucky, you can just click this A button and everything's going to look great. That does not look great. I did not like that. I'm hitting Control or Command Z to undo. Yeah, I'll cover this really quickly. We want to play with contrast, like we said before. So we see contrast can make the brights brighter and the darks darker. Color temperature, like we talked about before, does it look warmer or colder? I can play around with that. Saturation, which we talked about before, can increase or decrease just to make it feel like it looks okay. If you want to play with all of these sliders, you can too. I'm not going to go into it unless you guys really want me to, then I will. But we play around with it until we're happy with how it looks. There we go. We colored it. Go team. Now we want to deliver. I'll show you once again, the settings will start sounding familiar the more we go through this. First, what we want to do is click custom because we want to build this ourselves. The format is going to be MP4. Codec is H.264. If you ever see H.265, that's a newer one. It's very good, but not a lot of platforms can handle it. Keep it at H.264. Now we're going down to the resolution. This is, once again, hopefully looking familiar. Unfortunately, they made it very complicated. You can see a whole bunch of settings in here. So we want to be going for the one that's 720p, which you can see written over here on the right side, or as we said before, 1080p. And unfortunately, they didn't write 1080p here, but that's this one. So once again, I'll choose 720p. And our quality, here you can see we have kilobits per second instead of megabits per second. That just means we're going to add 1,000 to it. So before we said 4 megabits per second, here we want 4,000 kilobits per second. Yay, that part's done. Multipass encode, click that on. This will help ensure that our file size is closer to the desired size that we want. And last but not least over here, click video. Now we go over to audio, AAC, great, constant, great, bit rate, I like doing 192, sample rate 48,000. File, as we covered in our previous self-tape workshop, and we'll cover it again here, we want, the file is how they generally will be seeing and organizing the data coming into casting. So the important things are your name, the role, the project, and what this file is. So I always do full name. That's Alex Gravenstein. And then I do a dash, and I do my role. This is Guy. That's the name of the role. And project, I do parentheses, self-tape workshop. And this is scene 1, take 1. So I can do S1, T1, but honestly, it's the only thing I'm sending. So I don't need to add anything here, but I could also add slate, and I could write scene 1, take 1. There's lots of options as long as you just get the information in there. But here I don't need anything else. So that's it. The next wonderful fun thing about Resolve is we get to save these settings. So after you finish this the way that you like it, click these 3 little dots at the top, and you can do save as new preset. And 720p. That's what I'm just calling it here. My self-tape preset 720p. So whenever I want to export on Resolve again, I just select this and it's good to go. We click add to render queue, and then we click render. And I'm not going to do it because that's all I needed to cover for this one. I'm going to move on to Shotcut now, unless anyone has questions here.
I'm going to throw in a few questions.
Go for it.
Just to clarify that VN is the editing software you use on your phone to edit?
Yes.
Whereas DaVinci is if you are dumping your stuff onto your computer to edit.
Yes.
Okay. Heather's mentioned Clipchamp, which is apparently the new Windows editor.
Great. I'm not familiar with that. The only research I did was for programs that would work on Mac, Windows, and possibly Linux. So this way I can ensure that my tutorials will cover all those bases. If whatever editing platform you use, you're comfortable with it, it's able to send out in the correct format, great. That's all you need.
Don't mess with what's working.
Yeah, but these fundamentals will still be the same regardless of balancing your audio, balancing your video, reframing, and your export settings. Those will always be the same regardless. And if you don't have access to those options, I would consider looking into one of these instead.
Some questions about transferring your file from your phone to your computer, and in particular from Android to Mac.
Unfortunately, I don't know. It's there's plenty of, you can look this up online and Google. I know that's not a great answer. Some Android devices have SD cards, and you can use an SD card reader to put into your Mac. Some Android devices don't have that, and you have to plug in directly through USB. Some have dedicated apps you can download onto your Mac that will do a wireless transfer for you. So there's just so many options that I unfortunately can't cover all of them.
Ella's mentioned that she uses Google, but wondered if there were better options.
If it Google Drive is a perfectly fine way to do it, and we'll actually cover that too. We're going to cover Google Drive, Dropbox, and Vimeo.
Terrific. Okay.
I just saw a question in here about iMovie. I will get down to that as well. The issue with iMovie is how you export the files in the end, is that we don't have a lot of control over it. At least we haven't the last time I checked, which was a few years ago. So maybe they have more options now.
And when you go through Shotcut, can you also cover the scenario of when you've shot your slate separately, but want to combine clips together to make a single file?
Sure. All right, let's jump into Shotcut. So here we have Shotcut. Full disclosure, I have only used this for about an hour now, but I'm able to do what we need to do. So as before, every video editor will have some sort of way of looking at our files. Here they call it the playlist, which you can also access at the top. Some sort of place to do our editing, which you can see is the settings over here, including editing, FX, color, audio player, and some sort of way to export, which is this setting over here. So first thing we're going to do is bring in our footage. Once again, we can just drag and drop. There's my footage. And now we want to get it onto our timeline. Timeline, once again, like we saw in VN and Resolve, is where we do the editing. You can see timeline up here if it doesn't show up already. I click it, my timeline is already down there. So we drag this onto our timeline, make sure that we don't have any space at the beginning by clicking and dragging, and we can see our video here. So first thing we do is we trim it. We want, in this case, we want to get that eye contact. So I can click and drag this end sometimes. I'm just not letting it, there we go. Click and drag this end to get it there if I want to. I can also use the split option here and then delete the part that I don't want. And then I drag it back to the beginning. We do the same thing for the end as we saw before. Got to hear some fun sounds as we did that. And then we want to adjust the actual video settings itself. Shotcut is a bit different than all the other ones, where every adjustment we do to how the video looks and sounds is done through filters. So I'm clicking FX over here to get out my filters. You can also get this open by just clicking filters right up here. So first thing we want to do, as before, is adjust the size. It's saying nothing selected, so I have to go down here and select my video. Great. I hit the plus button, and I'm going to type in the size, and here we see size, position, rotate. As before, you see we get this to play around with. I'll drag it around to get even more of a close-up. Once again, I don't recommend zooming in this much, but for the sake of showing, this is what we're doing. And I position it to get some sort of close to center. As a cinematographer, I don't like having things exactly on center. I like a little bit just off. I find it's more fun for the image. You do what you want. After we, oops, I just moved it again. Okay, that looks good enough. After we do that, we want to play with the color. So we click plus, type in color, and this will look similar to what we saw in Resolve. Once again, you can just click and drag things to see what looks good, what doesn't. And yeah, I'm fine with that too. Notice that we don't have white balance in here, which is pretty useful to use. So here I'm going to, you also have brightness and contrast. If you prefer to use those, go for it. Play around with them, find what looks good and works for you. But white balance is its own setting. Click that, and then we get to adjust that until our eye says it looks okay. There's a lot of tutorials online about doing proper color grading. I'm not going to go into that. And that's pretty much it for the video. Next, we notice that the audio is not, we already know that it's not as loud as we'd like it to be. So let's go over into the audio setting. And this is just a very quick and it's just a very quick way to do the audio work. It's not as involved as Resolve. Sorry, it's not as accurate as what we did in Resolve, but it can get the job done. We see the audio waveform down here, and we look for the part where it's the loudest, or which means wherever this is the highest. So I'm just going over there, and I'm going to hit play, and I'm just going to watch my meters go up, and I'm going to see how high it goes.
You need a warrant for that.
Great. It looked like it went to about 6 or so. So I'm going to now adjust the audio by selecting this, and I think they call it gain and volume. There it is. And here I technically want most of my sound to be between -12 and -6 if you want to get into the sound realm of things. For this, since I know this is my loudest, I don't want it to go above 0. So I'm going to adjust it to maybe 4. I'm going to put about 4 higher just to bring it closer to 0. And because this is not very accurate, that's the best guess I can do. They do have normalization on here, but the way that it works is it alters a lot of the audio that's going through here, and not the same. How do I phrase this? It brings the quiet parts louder, and it brings the louder parts quieter, and just all of it upwards. So this can be very tricky if you have an audition that has a lot of silences, because all of a sudden it can start raising up the silences and playing a lot of noise in there. So I wouldn't recommend using this. You can sorry, I'll rephrase. Try using it. If you play through it and it sounds good, great, use that. I just wouldn't rely on it as much because it's unpredictable. Yeah, that's it. Then we export. So we're going over to the export button at the top. And here we get to export from timeline. And this is only showing up because I clicked advanced to begin with. So down here I click advanced. And once again, we get to see all of our settings. Here, we don't know what frames per second or FPS that we have for this video file. And if you're not sure what to use here, you can just guess that 30 is the right one to go to. If you want to be more precise with Shotcut, you can do that by going down here and right-clicking your file, clicking Properties. And here we see that this was shot in 1280 by 720, so 720p, and its frame rate was 23, etc. So I want to match this frame rate for this one. So I go back over here and I select the same numbers that we see. Yes, so we can skip everything else there. Codec, H.264 is, they recommend, it's practically the same one. libx264, you can use that, it's just fine. Copy these settings, there you go. We see 4 megabits per second again. This we can just ignore, except for dual pass, we want to have that back on. Audio, you'll see that we'll have the same settings as Resolve, 48 kilohertz, 192 kilobits per second for bitrate. Stereo is great, and this is on there by default. If it's not, type these in. Yeah, now that we have this all written down, you can actually export this setting as a preset as well. So here I'm going to click save, and I'm going to type in equity self-tape settings. And this one is for 1920 by 1080. So I'm going to make sure to mark that down, 1080p. And just making sure has my settings. Good. So whenever I want to export as this, all I can do is just click that now, and we export our file. Someone had asked about adding your slate to the end of this. So I don't have a slate with me right here, but let's say that this is a second video file and it is our slate. I would just drag it straight to the end, and then of course do everything that we did before about trimming, resizing, and recoloring to make sure it looks good. When I export this, it's exporting the entire timeline as one file. So these two will be back to back. If you're going to be exporting as individual clips, you can do that too by creating multiple timelines. Or no, I'm not going to do it that way. We're not going to cover that. DaVinci Resolve also has another way that you can export individual clips, and I'll just show you the setting. I'm not going to go into that because it's very particular, but it is the one that I use when I have a lot of clips on there. So just sharing again. So here I have Audition Indie Clip already set up, and the difference is it says individual clips. So this will go through my timeline, and every single time it finds a new clip, it'll export that clip as a brand new file. And it can save a lot of time if that's the way you normally do it. Once again, I'm not going to go into it, but those settings do exist and you can look it up yourself. Or if we have time later, we can cover it, but we're already 1 hour in. All right. I think that was the majority of the tech heavy stuff.
I'm going to jump in and pick up a few questions.
Go for it.
All of the specs you've been discussing are written out in the handout. Is that correct? Pretty much.
Pretty much they're in there, yes.
Okay. And we'll throw that link into the chat again in a second, so you can keep referencing it if you haven't got it already. Slating. Someone is questioning where we put the slate, the beginning or the end. Does it matter? If it's not specified, what's the industry standard?
So industry standard for slate, at least for film and television. Once again, I can't say what the standard is for theater. For film and television is when you record it, you want to see as much of your body as possible. You say your name, your agent, your height is pretty important for film. And sometimes they'll ask other things like where are you based, different proficiencies. They'll ask for profiles where you turn left, turn right, back to center. If it's a commercial audition, sometimes they ask for you to do a big smile and show your hands.
But in terms,
sometimes,
if you're,
I'm covering all of it.
Yeah, no, just whether you put it at the beginning or the end of your.
And for the file itself, I always export as a separate file. Sometimes they will specify in there that they want it at the beginning or at the end, which is also known as a tail slate. If I am including my slate in the video file because they requested one file total, and if they don't specify where to put the slate, I will probably put it at the end.
I do the same, just because my instinct is the first thing I want people to see is the character they've asked for.
That's
or whatever I want to present for the audition.
And that doesn't make it the right way to do it. I like just getting straight down to business and having that shown. If you think your slate is great and really shows and captures you, by all means, put it first. Just remember that when casting is watching through auditions, and they're watching sometimes hundreds of auditions in one day, and they're always seeing the slate at the beginning, especially if they're a little bit long, that's going to be something where it's going to be a task for them to keep going through when they feel like they want to jump into the story. So that's one of the reasons why I like doing the slate at the end, because I've worked in casting for a while. I've looked at thousands of auditions, literally, and seeing those slates over and over can be something where the brain might check out just a little bit. Yeah, I think we're gonna just jump into, oh, sorry. The very last thing is watch it. So after we look at our, after we edit it, we transcode and render or deliver our file to the computer before sending it off, make sure to watch it back. Even I sometimes make mistakes with my audio or whatever it is, and it doesn't look or sound right. So I watch it to make sure it looks and sounds good. I drag through once to make sure that all the cuts are where they need to be, and then I get ready for sending it on. We covered a lot of different things on how to edit and prepare these files. Some people might use their own other video editing software, which I said before is perfectly fine. The one that was mentioned about Windows, iMovie, that's perfectly fine. The thing is, we want to make sure that the file format at the end is something that's going to be good for uploading. So for that, and this can also work for Shotcut, DaVinci Resolve. It's on Mac and Windows. This program is called Handbrake, like the handbrake of a car. And this is a dedicated transcoding software. And this has been used in the industry for probably a decade now. And this, once again, you can just drag and drop your file onto here. And I will take you through the settings very quickly on how to set it up. And I've also saved you guys a lot of time by saving these setting presets that you can download from that same link that's already been shared. And you can download and use all of those too. So I'll show you how to import and export those settings.
So we're using Handbrake. We're taking the MP4 that we exported from our editing software and using Handbrake to compress.
So this is only if you're not doing those specific settings that I showed you on DaVinci Resolve and Shotcut or VN. So if you're not doing those specific settings for your export, then you do need to make sure that you do that as your final step. So Handbrake can cover that for you if you're not using what I've already shown you to export. Otherwise, what I covered with those two programs, or those three programs, that is ready to go straight to casting. So for all those who aren't doing those export settings already, this is what you can do regardless. And as always, a drag and drop.
Where would you be not using something to export into the right format?
Someone brought up iMovie before. So iMovie has very specific settings, very limited settings on there for the export.
Okay.
And I don't really know, like it keeps changing and there's not a lot of flexibility. And I've seen many exports being way too big coming directly from iMovie. I've seen ones from Windows Movie Maker and other ones where the settings are just being damaged as they're being uploaded into whatever system we're using. So if you're using any other export settings besides what I specifically just showed, we use Handbrake, and Handbrake will make sure that it's ready to go for you. So the settings should start looking familiar at this point. MP4, we want to turn on web optimized. Go over to dimensions. You can just follow along with what I'm doing here because it is it's a lot of settings to play around with here. The resolution is the important one in here though, if you're going to be exporting to 1080p or 720p. This one I'll keep at 1080. Filters we keep off. Video, make sure it's set to constant. Same as source. Bit rate. This setting should be your best friend by now. Here it is in kilobits per second, and I'm going to change that to 4. Turn on our 2-pass encoding to make sure the file size is closer to what we want. Our audio, I like as 192. Subtitles, none. Chapters, honestly, I don't know what this does, and the research I did on it doesn't have anything very specific of whether or not this is good or bad to include for short video clips. So I turn it off. That doesn't make me right about that one. And after we did these settings, save as new preset. Yay! Audition 1080. And we get to add it there. So I will show you that this video file that I put on here put a big black box around it. That's because the video that I dragged into it wasn't already 1080p, but I added a setting in here called borders. If I change that to none, it's going to get rid of the black box. I put this on here just in case people are not exporting at a normal 16:9, and honestly, maybe I'm going to just turn this off. We've seen many times in casting people upload a video that's in portrait, and that's when it's the camera is held vertically like this, and when it's sent over to casting, the processor, whatever is happening during the sending, will take that video and try to fit it to a normal wide box, and it'll stretch it sideways, which doesn't look really good for the video. So the setting I put on the Handbrake over here is to prevent that from happening, width and height with borders. But if I'm choosing the wrong resolution, it's going to be adding all this black box. So because I know that this was shot at 720, this one should have been 720. Just showing you full coverage on this in case you run into it and want to know why I did those settings. So yeah, all those presets I've already saved for you online, and after you download them, you can go into Handbrake, click presets, click this here, click import, and then you'll see the settings that I've already done for you. Click open, and you get all of those presets right here, so you don't have to click all those buttons. The one that should work pretty much every single time if you don't want to have that fine control, 720 quick. These settings will be good for pretty much anything. Just make sure to watch it back afterwards, and it's good to go. After that, of course, we name it, and we click start, and that's going to render it. So that's Handbrake.
So we don't actually have to know any of that stuff because you already done the work.
Yes.
And we can just download your presets.
Yes. But if people are having difficulty working with the presets or downloading it or whatever it is, I wanted to show exactly what's going into those and what I changed and why.
Terrific. And in theory, unless you're using iMovie, you can probably avoid the Handbrake step entirely and just export a good file from your editing software.
In theory, probably. If you're using Resolve or something like Resolve or anything that I've already shown you, the key settings are MP4, H.264, choose your resolution, either 1080 or 720, depends, and choose your bit rate to about 4 kilobits per second. Sorry, 4,000 kilobits per second, or 4 megabits per second.
Brilliant. My self-tape app, any familiarity with that?
Unfortunately, no. If you're using any other app and any other thing and you have not been getting any issues with it whatsoever that you've heard about, maybe it's fine. But these are the settings that are guaranteed to work and get the job done.
So sorry, Lynn, don't have anything to
I'm sorry
to offer on that. Title cards?
Title cards, it's similar to the idea that we talked about before with the slate. If we're including some sort of title before every single scene, or even title before every scene, then that's going to be something where the audience wants to jump into the story. And if they keep seeing these title cards coming in for 2 or 3 seconds, I feel like it can be breaking the flow. If you're putting text over top of your video, once again, you can Google how to do that for the applications I showed. I used to do that in the past. I don't anymore. Because to me, it feels like, let them figure it out. Jump into the story with me, be there hanging on, listening to the moments, instead of seeing what's happening written down there. And also because it's extra work. I just want to jump right into the scene, jump right into sending, move on to my day, and happily forget about the audition, which is an important mindset too, which I covered in the last session. The audition is supposed to be there for us to explore and have fun, not for us to stress about and try to fulfill some sort of ideal job or whatever it is. Because
I'm just thinking, I've had a number of situations where the audition requested specifically that 2 separate scenes be combined as one file. So even in that instance, no need to put a dividing title card to say, oh, we're moving on.
I even used to add transitions or black space between them. I just do hard cuts now. Once again, that doesn't make me right about that. By all means, you can add fade to black is a nice simple way to do it between each, or a couple seconds, like maybe 1 second of black. But that's up to you. For me, I just do quick cuts, all the video files right there. Once again, that doesn't make me right. That's just what I do.
Question from Francois. If I upload a file to Casting Workbook or Actors Access and rewatch, everything looks good. Is that proof that the video will be viewable by casting, or there's still an issue viewing the tape on their end that I'm unaware of?
That's a great question, and that will probably mean that your tape is fine. Because when you're viewing it on Casting Workbook, that's after Casting Workbook has already transcoded it. It's done the work. It's showing you its final result.
Okay. Are we going to be going to recording setup?
Last thing I'm going to cover is how to send the files.
Okay.
And then we're going to jump into the more fun stuff. Save dessert for last?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So as we can see here, I'll be covering these options under sending, which is down at the bottom. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to move this. There we go. So we're going to cover these options under sending. And as before, I'll start with the phone first, and then I'll move over to the computer after that. Okay, so we've just used BN to edit and transcode our footage, and it's ready to send to casting. Yay! So all we have to do is we're going to click Save to Album, and that'll show us our final video here. Once again, this could have multiple videos in it, including our take. It could be a standalone, whatever is easier for you, or whatever was requested, we do that. If you're doing multiple videos per audition and doing multiple projects, that can get very challenging to deal with on the phone. So probably aim for putting all your video files in one project instead of separate video files here. Click ... And here we see all these settings for sharing. So click share, click more. And on Android, it'll probably be different. I'm not familiar enough with it to know what the way to do it, but in the end, we want to get it to either Google Drive or Dropbox, which is not on here. I'll show you Drive first. So we click Drive, And what I usually like to do is I like to make a folder by clicking Create New Folder. And here I put all of that same information about my name, the role, and the project. So when I end up creating this folder and sharing this folder itself, they get to see all the important information right there, as well as the files. So now I click Save Here, and my video file has a strange name. So I'm going to touch that and edit the file name itself. And we'll just pretend I typed in the rest because I'm not fast at typing. And I click Upload. So we can go ahead and do it this way. I don't need this one to upload. The other way to do it, if you want to have more options, is you just click Save Video. And upon saving video, this will now go into our photos. So we can see our edited one here. And with this, I will have the exact same options for exporting that we saw from VN. So this might be a better way for you. Play around, see what's best for you. Click Share, and we can have more options in here now. And I'll show you Dropbox. Click Dropbox and choose a different folder, create a new one. Same as before with Google Drive, we create it and we choose it. We, of course, want to rename. If I'm going too fast, let me know, but I think this is pretty self-explanatory here. New name and save. Cool. Now let's pretend that we're already on Dropbox and we want to create something here. So here we just made a brand new folder, but now we want to share it with casting. So I click the dots and we click the share button, share link, and we get to, we'll just say copy the link and you get to paste it in your email address, in an email or whatever it is. I'm sure you can figure it out from here. This will let people view the final folder and all the files that you've put in there. We get a very similar thing for Google Drive. I don't know what it's doing right now. Okay, we'll just assume that we're creating a new folder. I don't know where it is. There it is. Okay. We click the ... share. And then from here, you click ... again. Skip sending notifications. Nope, they changed it up. I'm sorry. This was wrong. It was right. They moved it. Copy link. Copy the link, and then you're able to save that link. But we do have to make sure that when this is being shared, that anyone with the link can view. There it is. Okay. We touch this down here. We change it from restricted to anyone with link. And then you can go ahead and click this up here, and this will copy the link to the clipboard. That's the setting I was looking for. Once again, you send that on, and they'll get the link to the folder. They can download that folder and edit the files as they need to. I don't have Vimeo on this phone. Actually, I mean, Vimeo is pretty straightforward. If you want me to go into detail on it, I can. Upload the video, share the link to it, and you need a pro account to allow download. And make sure that you, if you are using Vimeo, make sure you have a pro account, because if they can't download it, then they can't put it into their own systems. So once again, if someone wants me, if enough people want me to cover that, I will. But
that is the issue. Is Vimeo is not free.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't have it on my list anyway, so I'm not going to cover it. Last but not least, on the phone is WeTransfer.
quick question about Vimeo.
Yeah.
Does Vimeo compress?
Vimeo compresses as well. And what's nice about Vimeo is that when you upload something to it, it'll actually compress in multiple different formats for you. So if you are
So
very
you can make a
comfortable with that,
choice.
you can probably skip Handbrake, skip all the other fancy encoding things, and Vimeo will handle that for you.
Okay.
WeTransfer can also be done directly from your phone. And all I'm going to do is I opened up a browser. This is Google Chrome. Go to the website. I have to log in first. Okay. Apologies about that. That was supposed to be done already. And here we choose, there we go. We choose send a file, and we're allowed to upload up to 2 gigabytes, which our video should be well under that if you're following these guidelines. Click plus to choose our files, go to photo library, and once again, we can select our video files from here. Click add, and if you want to, you can send this directly to casting from here or to your agent, or you can choose get a link. Do notice though that with this, it's going to be using the actual name of the video file, which we did not rename yet.
And you can't rename it here.
You can't rename it here. I'm pretty sure they add an option for this for changing. Yeah, so that's the catch with WeTransfer is I'm not sure of a way that we get to actually rename the file before sending. I'll find a way to do that for iPhones at least, and I'll add it to the document. But at least you can use that to send your agent and ask them to rename it. Or it's a way that you can at least get it to your computer too. But that's how you do it through WeTransfer.
Is YouTube a sensible option?
I do not recommend YouTube. It is very rare. I have seen some casting directors require YouTube exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I don't recommend YouTube is that casting has to go through extra steps to download the file to then process it in their own systems. So unless they're subscribed to a YouTube Premium, they're not going to be able to download the files.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to, I feel so claustrophobic with this right here. There we go. So I'll cover the same things on the computer. This should be relatively straightforward, but sometimes it isn't, and there's a lot of steps in the way, but I'll show anyway. So we'll go through Dropbox again first. We load Dropbox, create a folder, name, role, project, and we keep all these settings as they are. Then we're able to upload our files in here, which we can do by drag and drop to. And after that, we click share. Copy link. We click copy link. And we take this, and you can send that link onwards, and they'll be able to view and download the files from there. So same thing for Google Drive. Create a new folder. You can see the other test folders we have here. Name of folder. Obviously choose the correct name. Open it up, drag our file in there. Click the arrow and click share, because we need to change the access to anyone with link. At least 1/3 of the time that I'm receiving self-tape submissions from Google Drive, people forget this step. And then I have to go through extra emails in order to request access to this. Notice I did not specifically add, you can see my agent in there. Notice I did not specifically add people from this list. I didn't type in any email addresses because I don't need to send them extra emails that way. I want to have control over my link. I just change this here and do copy link, and I send this where I want. And that's going to be perfectly usable now for anyone else as well. Obviously, it'll look like this to them, and they can view and download the files. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we covered all of the tech stuff now. Great. Any questions about any of that before we jump on to the fun stuff?
I have a lingering question about Slate in terms of the orientation of the image.
So,
and whether it should be a wider shot or not. But I think the answer is generally, what do they ask you for?
they generally want to see as much of your body as possible in the slate. If you are going, if you are going through these steps that I've shown you with editing on those programs, and you include a slate in there, it's going to push it down to the correct video size for you. So it'll take your image and it'll squeeze it into the correct height for the right box, and it'll add black bars on the outside, and it'll still be able to show it on there. If you record like this and send it directly like that, that's when you run into the problem where it might be stretching the entire image out sideways.
There was this question in advance about, are edits allowed?
And the main rule of thumb for self-tapes is, can you be heard clearly? Can you be seen clearly? That's it. So to support that, we want to make sure that nothing we introduce to our self-tape is distracting. That's when we get into things like, don't have a distracting background that's has a lot of stuff going on in there. Don't have distracting sounds around you that could be pulling away from the storytelling that you're doing. Make sure that our framing is adequate so that it's not being distracting about how we're trying to tell the story and we can't really be seen. Make sure that we have decent lighting, because if our lighting is a bit aggressive and creates a lot of shadows, then that's going to be distracting again. And of course, good microphones and everything else. When it comes to editing, it's the same thing. I have done edits for a single take and proper editing in there where you can't tell it's happening, and I'm fine with that. If you're doing editing for the sake of editing to add extra flair and pizzazz or whatever it is, then that's probably going to be taking away from your performance. I hope that answers the question.
So you're saying you've done edits where the result was seamless and didn't look like an edit, just to create a better take effectively.
Yeah, and I have seen edits before where, say, a character needs, in the middle of a scene, they have to leave to go do something else, and they're walking into a new scene or whatever it is, and that's all part of one take. I've seen edits where we do cuts on that, and they're fine. Since we have a lot of new people, I can show you the way that I prefer to do that without any edits. And it gets to keep the story flowing without any need of doing something in your video editor, which we always want to try and avoid if we can.
My gut is that since we're talking here primarily about live performance auditions, you shouldn't be needing to edit your live performance.
I agree. You shouldn't be needing to, but at the same time, time pressure, other technicalities might get in the way, and that
the police car goes
solution.
by the window.
Yeah, and little things like that, honestly, are probably just fine. If the sound of a distant siren is distracting enough for your take, then maybe play around with energy choices too. Who knows? What was it? I think Martin Scorsese said, "If you notice my edits, I did a bad job as a director." I think that's a fun thing to remember.
Great. Okay. Where are we moving on to now?
So if there aren't any other questions about the specific technicalities we have there, I was going to go into equipment.
Terrific. And some setup stuff, because there's a bunch of questions around that.
Yeah, and some setup stuff.
And I will remind everyone that this session has dealt a little bit more with the technical side of editing and exporting and sharing. So we're not going to delve that much into gear and setup, but the previous session was recorded and is available on the website. So please go back and review that if you weren't able to attend, or even if you did, because there's lots of information, and it'll hopefully pick up a lot of the questions that are lingering around this stuff.
Yeah, so this one was designed to be very technical, and a lot more of the performance and troubleshooting for your setup was covered in the previous one. So yes, thank you for that reminder. Yeah, the basic setup that we need is some way to hold your camera, some way to hold some light, and some way to hear you properly. And with my equipment recommendation list, did we share that
Not
already?
yet in this session.
Okay. isolaction.live/equipment. I'll have it typed out so you don't have to spell it. This is a lot of the equipment that I recommend, all on one sort of tripod. So this is just a light stand, and on it I have a phone holder. We talked before in the previous one about the difference between lav microphones, also known as lapel mics, which you can see right here, that little guy, as well as shotgun mics. From my quick research, I saw people asked about recording for singing auditions, musical theater, things like that. I have found a lot of support once again for lavalier microphones. So I would recommend trying it out. The reason I suggest lav over a shotgun is the proximity. Microphones can only be as good as the sound environment that they're in, and the sound is much happier when the microphone is closer to the subject that it's capturing. So with our shotgun mic, especially if we're doing some sort of theater audition, which probably has wider framing, then the microphone will have to be farther away from you unless you want to get it in the shot or deal with a troublesome setup to get the microphone close to you in a wide shot. So the lav mic has that covered. Also, for a lot of stage work, there's usually lavs on people when they're doing theater. They tend to attach them on top of the head. I've never tried that for my own self-tapes. You can if you want to. Those are also higher end microphones. But usually I get a lav and attach it right onto my chest. You'll see all of the cords that I have recommended in the equipment list. So one of them is just a cable to extend my lavalier to be longer. This way I have extra wiggle room. And then the final one is a cable to get it into my phone, which is called the U-Green cable. This is covered in detail in the other one as well. If there's enough interest, I can cover it here. But you need an adapter to go from a microphone into your phone to tell the phone that it actually is a microphone. And the quick view for that is the difference between these two tips. So you can see that one tip has 3 plastic rings and the other tip has 2. If we're going to be recording with a microphone on our phone, then we're going to be needing an end going into the phone that has 3 plastic tips. Sorry, 3 plastic rings on there. This adapter will help you change that. And last but not least, we have a lot of iPhone users. Make sure to get some sort of adapter to put it into the iPhone too. And that's how I can capture sound with the lav mic itself. Also up here, we have one of my favorite tools. It's called a magic arm. And I'm using this both to hold the phone as well as holding the light. These are adjustable. You can attach them to chairs, to lamps, to desks, to bookshelves, to make anything that you want your tripod. So I don't have to attach it to this, but I did.
I remember
Yep.
I was terribly impressed when I saw your portable studio kit fits down into something the size of a pencil case.
Yep. This is the, when it's filled up, it's a little bit bigger, but it gets to about that.
Your light, your mic, your magic arm, everything.
Yep. My lights, the magic arms, gear ties, selfie stick, everything fits into this for my travel self-tape kit. And everything that's in here is also on that list in the document. I mean, yeah, I think kind of the rest here is self-explanatory. I have the light that's above my phone. Make sure that when we do set up a light that it is generally above wherever your camera is, because most light sources tend to be from above you, and you'll see how it changes when the lights start getting lower and lower. So I have the light above my phone, and yeah, everything is plugged in, and this is technically ready to go. If you're able to record with someone else, I highly recommend to use the other side of your phone. The phone on the back, the camera on the back of your phone is generally always higher quality than the one on the face. So if the other person can watch, have them stand over here, and then you can use the camera that's on this side instead.
So the reason you'd be using the other camera is because you've got a remote reader and you want to see their face.
Or you need to see yourself. Because if you can't record on this, at least not yet, or maybe with the apps that I'm aware of, you can't record on this and see a remote reader at the same time. If you had two phones, which you could set up with another magic arm, then you could have your reader at the same time. And I've done that before too. Also on that list, yep.
Quick question about lavs.
Yep.
Is there a concern about sound of clothing and rustling and stuff?
Yes. So for lavalier microphones, if you attach it to your clothing, make sure that it's pointing outwards. And it's really hard to see on this tiny little screen. Make sure it's pointing outwards and not anywhere near fabric that's going to be touching. And it's okay if it shows. We're not trying to pretend that we're not using sound or lighting or whatever it is. It's okay if it shows. So this way you don't have to be a professional sound technician with placing it underneath and patting it in orientation. I put it right on top of my chest, have it right there, and make sure that no fabric is near it for rubbing.
And is an external mic a deal breaker, or is the mic on your phone potentially good enough?
Well, as before, any mic is only good as the environment that it's in. You can have a $10,000 mic next to your phone and be shooting in a subway station, and of course it's not going to be very good because we're picking up a lot of noise. Or you might just be too far away from it and we hear the sound of the room more so than we get to hear the sound of you. Which
is likely what happens if you're using just the phone mic, because it's at a distance from you.
Exactly. And on top of that, the phone mic is also a omnidirectional microphone. It tries to capture everything around it, including behind, on top, below, you name it. Whereas something like a shotgun mic is focused on what it's pointing at. So shotgun mic helps a lot. Plus, if you're using a phone mic and you have your reader next to the phone, odds are that reader is going to sound very loud compared to you. So we want to make sure that we, the performer, are heard the best. I saw a similar question before about Zoom readers or readers who are electronic, and that's perfectly fine. The rule of thumb is always do a test recording and make sure nothing is distracting. So do a test recording with your position, lighting, sound, everything set up. You say a line or say words, have the reader say a couple words, go back and listen to it. If the reader sounds way too loud or way too quiet, with technology, we can turn them up and down.
One thing I've found is that if you're using a reader over Zoom, a remote reader, that if you have them use a mic, that improves the quality of their sound a little bit.
Mics improve quality of all sound.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the reader itself, many times the clarity of what the reader is saying is not as important, because we need to see how the performer is dealing with the story instead.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would be distracting. I mean, if it's very noisy, of course, if the reader is very noisy and we hear a lot of ruffles and all those things, of course we don't want that. So same rule of thumb as before. If it's not distracting, it's probably fine. One other thing with the setup over here, in the equipment list, I recommend getting a phone holder that has a Bluetooth adapter. So this Bluetooth just pairs with my phone, and whenever I want to start the video, I just hit the button. And I can start and stop the video that way, instead of having to go up here and hit the recording button and then run back. So this makes it very handy. And also, if you want to have more fun, I put some Velcro on the back and I just store it there. Just saying what we covered. That's actually a lot of it already. Lighting. A lot of people have difficulty with lighting, and I don't blame them. I still play around with how I'm optimizing my lighting setup or different lighting setups. Usually we want two sources of light. One sort of light that's focused and really lights us up. That can be a nice directional light like this, or my key light, as it's called, is this one right there. And then the second light is called the fill, which helps fill in the shadows. So that's pretty much the basics for lighting. You can go into a 3-point lighting setup too if you want. Google it, unless there's a lot of interest, I can cover it here. And that third light helps separate you from the background, essentially. I very, very rarely use it. When I do, it's this light here, and I have it up on the corner over there and pointing at my back. But yeah. If you are using a light like this, or you're using any other light and it looks too harsh, what you need is a diffuser. Deena mentioned before how you like to use parchment paper. That's a great option because it won't burn. If you're using lights that don't get hot, you can also use a plastic sheet of some sort, like this is a garbage bag. My official self-tape setup for years was a light bulb that was on an extension cord, just a light bulb on an extension cord, attached to a tripod. And I had a bag that was just hanging right over it like this. And that was my diffuser. And it worked. It wasn't great, but it was better than the direct light I got. If you have the gear ties, which I used all over life, if you have these, you can actually use it to create an extra sort of box on top. I just wrapped it around, and now I've created more of a soft box with this little light.
Now, because with theater auditions, people may be framing slightly wider, more of a medium shot. Does that have any impact on how you light or how well you can light with just two sources?
That's another great question. Lighting changes proportionally to the distance from the light. Inverse square law, I think it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong, for those who know. So the closer the light moves, it becomes exponentially brighter. So if you're shooting a wide shot, and your lighting is that much farther away, then yes, the lighting will probably have to be significantly more powerful to give that same representation. Daylight is one of the best things you can always use. So if you have a lot of windows, that can really help out, but that makes us time dependent, unfortunately. Yeah, sorry, I saw someone mention the Rode Go 2 and the Rode Lav are very nice things. I'm assuming that's a Rode Wireless Go. I actually use those too. They're very fun. But lav mics, we have someone else here who's mentioning that they're using labs for singing recordings. So that's a cool validation there. Back to lighting and framing. This actually came up a couple of times before about what it means to do what the framing actually means for a tape. So this here is a demonstration of a film or TV audition that's going to be using framing that's similar to this over here. And I showed what I was doing in the wide shot at the same time. Before I jump into that, I think I covered this in the previous one as well. I was asked, how do we frame for theater and theater auditions compared to film or TV? And my answer was, and still is, I don't know the right answer for it. But at least the theory behind it, I think I have a pretty good answer, at least for something for you to play around with. So film and TV, the medium is something where the camera will be capturing, most likely, a medium close-up shot of us, because our audience wants to feel close to us. When it comes to video game work, the stage all of a sudden becomes a lot bigger. And they ask for, in video games, a 3/4 to full shot, which means down to your knees or shins, or your entire body in frame, because your physical body starts doing a lot more of the storytelling work. And by changing that framing, the energy of your story and the energy you play with has to change too, to what I call the scope of the audition. So for theater, I'm sure you can imagine, or you've done before, being on stage in front of 300 people. And you can imagine feeling that crowd, that energy, feeling that for a specific performance. Let's say it's an argument you're having. Now what changes if I tell you that crowd is for 3,000 people on a bigger stage? Of course, you're going to be mic'd. Maybe they're going to have some really big cameras set up on you. I'm sure your energy is probably going to change a bit to sort of fill that space. Now what if I tell you the audience is 10 people instead, small group? You see where I'm going with all of this. Film and TV is the idea that you are performing for someone that's one person and standing just 3 feet away from you. And the camera is what sort of reflects that there. And that's why we end up getting this sort of medium close-up shot, because that's generally what you see when you're standing right next to someone. And that's what gives us this intimacy. For video games and theater work, I imagine, we're probably going to be shooting 3/4 to a full shot, because all of a sudden our body and the rest of the, we get to feel the rest of the stage that we're doing. We get to feel the rest of the space that we get to play with over here. So this is an example of a film TV style audition where the medium was supposed to be here, but I show a wide shot. This was technically just to show how I'm doing a bunch of miming off camera, but you can see how the energy here doesn't quite feel like it matches the energy over here, even though these are the identical shots. So I'll just go through a little bit of this to see it.
They're gonna find us any second, and they're gonna kill us too. We shouldn't have come back.
Where the hell is Mitchell?
He's gone. We have to leave now.
Shut up, shut up. I feel a faint pulse.
This is all I could get. Whoa, 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 what are you doing?
Okay, Mitchell, I'm gonna need you to come over here. Spread his ribs for me. I got it. I got his aorta in my hand.
Yeah, I can feel a faint pulse. You crazy son of a...
And I'll keep playing. You already get at least the idea of the feel that I'm talking about here. Or if you don't, let me know and I can explain it more. The reason I'm pausing here is because we mentioned this briefly before. What happens if you have to change location or change scenes in the middle of what's supposed to be one scene. So here my character hears something and he has to grab an imaginary weapon and load it, and then steps outside and then walks outside all in one continual shot. I've seen people walk out of frame for this and walk back in. I find that a bit distracting. The trick that I love doing is simply just sort of taking a step back, dealing with the new environment, and then walking into it for the first time. And then I like that because then we get to see the transformation happening for the character instead of having that happen off frame instead.
You coming in? Or are we coming out? Well, seems y'all really sent us on a wild goose chase. I hope it was worth the wait.
Stay the hell away!
We don't need to see anymore. You get the idea. Here I'm using my hands as props the entire way through, but you see the sort of setup difference between how I'm capturing and telling the story on a smaller frame versus a larger one. And you guys might feel it differently, but for me, that larger frame where we see my whole body, it feels like the energy isn't properly filling the space. So just wanted to say that when it comes to those auditions for especially theater, I would probably play with wider shots and playing back to see if it really feels like the performance is carrying through. Obviously, always read whatever the requirements are from casting itself.
I think this is a great moment to kind of segue into our closing. I just want to remind everybody that a lot of the material around setup and gear was covered in a little bit more detail in the first session. So please look up and review the recording that's on the website. And I think Randy has popped that into the chat a couple of times. I also did a really crummy job of introducing you, Alex, at the beginning. So I want to give you a moment to talk a bit about ISIL Action and perhaps some of the services that are available to members that they might want to look up after.
Yeah, okay. So I guess I probably should have said this too to begin with. I am from Montreal, and a handful of years ago, I started working for one of the large casting directors here, who was involved with most of the Hollywood films that came through here, like X-Men. I'm blanking right now. You get it, Roland Emmerich films,
stuff,
Day
all
After
the stuff.
Tomorrow, 48 Hours Later, a whole bunch of like very big films, as well as like large TV shows like Jack Ryan, Bold Type, if you're familiar with those ones. Anyway, I was involved in the story department, which had to do with processing scripts, creating sides for actors, and processing self-tapes, as well as being in the audition room as camera or reader for hundreds of auditions. So I've processed thousands of self-tapes, and I've been in the actual audition room for hundreds of sessions as reader and or camera. And as I was doing all of that, I started wondering myself, what makes a good audition, as all actors wonder. And I started looking at all the auditions that tended to be more captivating versus the ones that weren't, and finding what is that sort of difference to play around with. And after talking with a lot of people and a lot of research and studying, I kind of found something to sort of play around with. And that inspired me to create some audition workshops too. At the start of the pandemic, right before the pandemic, I ended up having an in-person self-tape workshop that was working on audition room etiquette, how you create your self-tape setups, how you work with the camera. And I created another workshop on cold reading, which if you don't practice that, I highly recommend looking into it. It's a lot of fun. It opened my eyes up a lot to what storytelling really means and what matters in there. at the start of the pandemic, those workshops, I put them together with my business partner, and we made them online, and we made them free for about half a year, just to anyone in the world, any who wanted to play around with self-tapes, auditioning, cold reading, practicing those things. And we got enough positive feedback that we made a business out of it. And that's called Isolaction, because the tagline was, "Are you isolated? You should come isolect." And the name stuck. So that's been going on for about 2 years now. We're working with people in the US, across Canada. If you are interested, we gave a free month of January auditing for everyone in the previous workshop, and we're going to extend it for everyone here as well. And I think the link is also, or the information is also in that file. If it's not, I'm gonna, no, I'll have to, it's not in here actually. I'll have to send it out to you separately. So I'll give you a coupon code if you guys are interested. Come check it out and join us for a month. That also includes the monthly self-tape challenge that you get to do. But yeah, it's an all Zoom class. We like to be the utility belt for actors. If you want to practice voiceover work, video game work, audition room practice, self-tape practice, story work, environment work, actions, the list goes on and on. Anything you want to practice, you can do that. And you don't have to actually attend in order to utilize our service, because everything's recorded and we send it to you after.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Alex. We are almost at time. I want to thank our interpreters, Amanda and Cynthia, for struggling through all of this technical information. And this has been the fifth in a series of workshops and seminars that Equity has been happy to bring to its members on topics of importance to the industry, and most particularly pertaining to dealing with the impacts of the pandemic on live performance in various ways. And we are very grateful to the Government of Canada for funding these programs through the Department of Heritage as part of the Canada Performing Arts Workers Resilience Fund. I know that I have certainly benefited from a lot of the webinars and information sessions, and I'm very glad that our government was able to give us some support in that. As we've mentioned, the recording of this session will be available. It might take a few days, but you'll be getting a link to that when that's ready. We are at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much to everyone who came. I hope this has given you a little more confidence, and the two handouts that have been linked are enormously useful. They're full of information. A lot of the technical stuff that makes me stressed is right there. And the fact that Alex has also made some presets that you can just download from the interweb is kind of fabulous. Thank you to everyone for coming. And thank you, Alex.
If I could say just one final thought, it's practice this technical stuff to get comfortable with it. Because like I said before, we want the energy to be in having fun with storytelling and not with the headache of how do I transcode and send a video file. So practice this, dedicate some time to it to make it so you don't have to worry about it. It makes a huge difference. Absolutely.
I know that in the earlier days of the pandemic, the technical side of this was just so stressful. And not that I would wish a pandemic to last as long as it did, but over the course of time, things get a little easier with practice. Stay safe and well, everyone. And I think this is our last session before the holiday break. So peace to you and rest and much joy for the new year.